Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this all-important discussion. Is philanthropic freedom disappearing? Causes, effects, and consequences. I'm Debbie Gatte. I'm Philanthropy Roundtable's Vice President of Strategy and Innovation, and I'm joined by a panel of leading Roundtable experts today to help us understand what the threats are to our ability to financially support the causes we hold dear, to give freely. Before we get started, there's a few housekeeping suggestions that I wanted to make because we are in a lovely Zoom environment today. There is a way for you to choose a side-by-side view, and we recommend that for this because we will have some slides. So that is one option, is to choose side-by-side, and that will allow you to adjust the slides so that you can customize how large you would like them to be on your screen. And then we will only have active speakers on view. So if you want to remove people who are non-video participants, that will also give you some more visual space. So just some suggestions there to help improve your Zoom experience today. So back to our topic. So first, a word about the Roundtable. We exist to help build and sustain a vibrant American philanthropic movement that strengthens our free society. So philanthropic freedom is a critical concept we champion on your behalf and on the behalf of all individual donors or institutional ones. What do we mean by philanthropic freedom? I mean, we mean two things. We mean first, your freedom to make voluntary charitable donations. And second, your freedom from any restriction or coercion as you do so. So it's a freedom to and a freedom from. So basically, we are here to support your ability to donate your private funds how and where you would like. So the concept of philanthropic freedom has actually been under attack for decades. Our goal today is to help introduce the causes, effects, and consequences of those attacks. So now let me introduce my wonderful colleagues who are here to help us unpack these issues today. John Tyler. John is General Counsel, Secretary, and Chief Ethics Officer for the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation and a lecturer for Columbia University. He is also a member of the Roundtable's board and a longtime member of the ACR Steering Committee. ACR is the Alliance for Charitable Reform. John is the author or co-author of 2 Roundtable publications, along with several other pieces, and he's a frequent conference presenter for us and others. Next, we have Sandra. Sandra Swirsky has led the Roundtable's advocacy arm in Washington for 15 years. She's known for her political savvy, her coalition building expertise, and substantive policy chops. Her expertise comes from years on Capitol Hill, working for senior senators and leading government relations teams for companies and clients in the private sector. Welcome, Sandra. Christy Herrera. Christy is our executive director of the Alliance for Charitable Excellence, which is a project of the Philanthropy Roundtable. ACE, as it's known as, champions the philanthropic freedom that allows our nation's charitable sector to thrive within the philanthropic community and in state houses across America. Hi, Christy. And finally, Sarah Barber. Sarah Barber has worked for the Philanthropy Roundtable's Alliance for Charitable Reform for 5 years, for which she develops and executes advocacy efforts to maintain and defend philanthropic freedom. Her work on behalf of ACR includes local engagement with members of Congress, bill writing, regulatory and legislative analysis, and coordination of sector-wide advocacy campaigns. So hi, Sarah. All right, so now that we have met our panelists, what we are going to do is have a chance to speak with each of them to learn more about the story behind the threats to philanthropic freedom. And we're going to talk with them one at a time and then bring them all back for a Q&A at the end. So I'm going to ask Sandra, Christy, and Sarah to take a seat behind the curtain for a moment. And we're going to have a few minutes to talk with John. So John, welcome.
Thank you, Debbie. It's great to be here, and I've been looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this. So we just talked a little bit about what we mean by philanthropic freedom, But could you tell us more about where that concept originates?
Sure. I mean, of course, I mean, philanthropy itself is not new, and it's not unique to the United States. You know, there have been exercises of philanthropy that go back millennium and across a variety of cultures. But there is a unique aspect and unique experience about it in the United States over the last couple of centuries. And part of it is that philanthropy is not just the purview of the wealthy. Philanthropy is something that that all can be part of by giving of time, talent, treasure. And a lot of the roots of philanthropy, and from an individual standpoint, they're grounded in moral, civic, religious perspectives, opportunities, duties sometimes, and then the exercise and fulfillment of that. But perhaps more specifically, there's both a legal grounding, and within the legal grounding, there's constitutional grounding. And part of the core legal grounding for philanthropic freedom is, comes from the fact that I'm just looking at the note. Hopefully, this is not muffled, but
We can hear you. We can hear you well.
okay.
Yeah.
So part of the legal grounding comes from core principles around the right to property. That is part of the founding and grounding of the United States and the U.S. experience. Even through to today. And the right to property. It comes from common law. It comes from natural law. It's enshrined in the Constitution. It's enshrined in our principles, cases, etc. And it's the right to acquire, to possess, and to dispose of the property that we have. And these are in essence private decisions, as particularly the disposition of property. And it's that disposition of property where it intersects very specifically with philanthropy. And I mentioned within the legal grounding, there's both the right to property, but there's also other constitutional aspects. One aspect of that is philanthropy is an extension of the blessings of liberty that is core to in the preamble about why we have a constitution and what our nation is in part an expression of the blessings of liberty. More specifically, we've got the First Amendment, which embraces freedoms of speech, freedoms of religion, freedoms of assembly and association, and freedoms and rights about petitioning government. So all of those are part of the expression of philanthropic freedom.
Thank you. All right. So deep roots, deep foundational roots, and a long, long history. So at what point did there begin to be efforts to stake claims on philanthropic dollars?
Well, a lot of the claims on the philanthropic dollars and notions perhaps that that philanthropic dollars are so-called public dollars, comes from 100 years ago, a little bit over 100 years ago, when John D. Rockefeller and Andrew Carnegie started to formalize their philanthropic efforts, following on the wealth that they created, that they experienced as part of the blessings of liberty, so to speak. And there was a tremendous amount of skepticism and opposition to connecting the Rockefeller wealth from Standard Oil, the Carnegie wealth from U.S. Steel and his prior railroad works, from connecting that concentration of wealth into an enterprise, and then that enterprise, being so tied into society. And we had, Frank Walsh in particular, commissioner, and then a few others who are noted back then over 100 years ago, but also, noted still yet today. But interestingly enough, those criticisms were really about the foundations of Rockefeller and Carnegie. You didn't hear back then criticisms of of the Peabody Fund, which was founded in 1867, or Julius Rosenwald's efforts, which began in earnest in 1917, or Olivia Sage, the Russell Sage Foundation, founded in 1907. At least I'm not aware of opposition to those formalizations of philanthropy, but there was significant opposition to Rockefeller and Carnegie. At the same time, you've got the John Rockefeller experience within democracy and as part of the democratic exercise of democracy. On one hand, Rockefeller initially went to the United States Senate and the US Congress to get a federal charter, if you will, for his philanthropy. But in the exercise of democracy, that was rejected. That was not something that Congress was prepared to do at that time. So there was opposition to it, and it was voiced and succeeded. The flip side of that is Rockefeller was able to go to the state of New York, where there was still some opposition to it, but there was acceptance of it as well. And so in the exercise of democracy, the John D. Rockefeller or the Rockefeller Foundation was founded. So you've got that's sort of the beginning of it. But as you said a few minutes ago, that's continued. And then over the decades and over the last century, we have continued to see shortly after, the Rockefeller experience, the income tax, which became a grounding for a tax later on, substantially. But skepticism from the 1950s and 1960s, skepticism in the 60s, particularly about the Ford Foundation and some of its activities at that time, and opposition. Of course, the skepticism and opposition continues today, which, by the way, I don't think that skepticism and opposition are necessarily a bad thing. I think grounding and understanding philanthropy and the philanthropic experience is important, and it's a good thing. And being able to give voice to the importance of philanthropy in our society is a good thing.
I need to move on soon to Sandra, but before I do that, what is in your mind the best argument or the best arguments for why philanthropic dollars should be public?
Well, I think that there are two key arguments that people present, and they both to degrees go back to 100 plus years ago and continue through to today. And one is the notion of, and I mentioned a minute ago, the income tax. With the income tax also then followed charitable deductions and charitable exemptions for organizations under 501c3. And so there's two arguments. One is this notion of tax subsidy. Because of the tax subsidy, it's therefore arguably public money. And the second argument is notions of private decision making about the public good. So in looking at the first one, the argument is, there are several nuanced arguments that are part of this, but at a high level, the argument is, and you see the tax code up there, and Rob Reish's book where he gets into this, and others do as well. I had the privilege of working with Evelyn Brody a couple of years ago to develop a monograph for the Roundtable that looks at these arguments in greater depth than I can go into now, and effectively rebuts them. But the tax argument at the high level is money that would otherwise be paid in taxes and would go to the government and be able to be spent by the government doesn't, because of deductions and exemptions. And therefore, government should have influence and say. One of the problems, there are many, but one of the problems with that argument is that it goes too far. It effectively says any and all tax treatment, any and all deductions, any and all credits, including, by the way, the standard deduction, which is money that would otherwise go into government coffers as well, with that mindset. That any and all money becomes public money, and the government has that right. So by extending the argument, it becomes, I think, a core problem societally. In the public good argument, it's private decision making about and for and imposed on the public good. Also doesn't quite go or it goes too far, because there are so many private decisions that affect the public good. And to say that the government has a monopoly on what should be public good is not the American experience, and tying back to other things. We rely on private sector engagement, and businesses from the get-go. Businesses are making private decisions that affect the public good. Whether it's technology, the development innovations around technology, other innovations. And so the public good argument, trying to narrow it into philanthropy, I think when you extend it, it goes too far and becomes problematic.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that is very important overview and context for this conversation. Thanks, John, for sharing how it is we got here and what those main arguments are for the case against free philanthropy. So John, I'm going to ask you to turn your video off and ask Sandra to join us, and then we'll see John back for the Q&A. Hi, Sandra.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. This is a really important topic. Now, you spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the picture of Capitol Hill here. But how is it that you approach conversations with lawmakers about this public good argument or about philanthropic freedom? How do you talk to them?
Sure. So unlike the other side, our position is the charitable deduction and tax exemption, as John talked about, are not government subsidies that would convert charitable dollars into public property. Rather, Congress really intended the charitable sector, known as the independent sector, to be generally free from government taxes. So the charitable deduction really was created to eliminate these taxes on charitable gifts that fund the independent sector, whether those gifts go to foundations, donor advised funds, or directly to charity. Makes sense, right?
Right.
But would you believe the Roundtable is the only national organization consistently making this case? But for the Roundtable, lawmakers would only hear from the subsidy squad, as I like to call them, pushing the notion that the government subsidizes charitable dollars. And because of that subsidy, the government has the obligation to make sure the public's money is well spent. They do that by regulating and rulemaking and grant making, which jeopardizes your philanthropic freedom. Mm. So I've been reading a lot lately about Joe Biden's pledge that when he's president, he's going to, quote, end the era of shareholder capitalism and hand private business over to the stakeholders, the government, unions, and communities. Well, folks, that's what we're talking about here, handing private philanthropy over to stakeholders. So after November, the expected wave of progressive lawmakers will likely push donors and foundations to do more with the public's money. More payout, more inclusive policies, more representation from the communities you serve, on and on.
Wow.
Those that don't go along will be shamed and, as the young kids say, canceled. So please know we see this coming, and we are doubling down on the work we've done to date, corralling allies so that we may stand together against the subsidy squad and for philanthropic freedom.
Excellent. Excellent. Good. Thanks, Sandra. So now that we've heard about what you're expecting and sort of what the flavor of it is, can you tell us a little bit more what the key tactics are from a policy perspective that people are using to try and limit philanthropic freedom?
Sure, and we're going to put some screenshots of some articles up that are coming fast and furious. So I'd like to begin with transparency and payout. The subsidy squad's ultimate goal is to direct your grant making, but it's too self-serving to go there directly. So the strategy appears to be to force transparency about where charitable dollars are going and who is making these decisions. They argue that since it's the public's money, the public has a right to know who, the what, the where. For now, the states are really taking the lead on forcing this transparency. And like in California, they're pushing for more information about people with donor advised funds, and other states' attorneys general are watching closely, and we understand starting to even talk about model legislation. As for payout, in recent years, the subsidy squad has grown mostly from, it's kind of started with academics and commentators, and it now includes a number of wealthy donors who have become frustrated that their peers won't join the chorus to half their death. So these wealthy donors are now pivoting to demand that Congress force the issue. And the pandemic and the protests have really blown tremendous wind into their sails.
Wow. So can you share some examples of some of the active threats that you're seeing right now? So what's actively happening?
Sure. So earlier this summer, the calls for Congress to, quote, do something were really troubling. So much so that we helped prompt a joint letter to key lawmakers signed by a number of national organizations, reminding those lawmakers that donors were not just increasing their grant making during this time, but also recommitting themselves to their grantees with more than just dollars. Again, as we look ahead to next year, we can expect the payout issue to loom even larger because we're expecting this wave of more progressives in Congress.
Okay. Do you think of this as sort of the beginning of something bigger, or a slippery slope kind of thing? You know, there's a set of steps here?
Sure, no, absolutely. As I noted earlier, we believe the end game is to direct your grant making. So transparency will provide them with the names of the donors, how much you're giving, where it's going. So with a roadmap, right? Basically a roadmap to intimidate and shame. Even if donor advised funds and foundation payouts would rise dramatically, it will never be sufficient, either because the need will never be met or the charity won't be deemed sufficiently charitable. They know better, and they really like to help you.
Thank you, Sandra. So subsidy squad, transparency, and payout, these are all things that we have to really, really keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sandra, I'm going to ask you to turn your video off and have Christy join us. And hi, Christy.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. So Sandra just told us about some tactics and some policy threats that she has seen out there. Are there any other tactics that you've seen?
Absolutely. I mean, threats to philanthropic freedom are really growing by the day. I think both John and Sandra bring up a great point, and that is when philanthropy is public money, there is really no limit to the number of mandates that someone can dream up and try to impose on the philanthropic sector. But today, Debbie, I want to kind of highlight two big ones: diversity mandates and donor disclosure. First, let's talk about diversity mandates. I think we all agree that diversity is a laudable goal. Of course it is. But the issue is when mandates are forced onto the philanthropic sector just to check a diversity box. So a lot of folks might be asking, well, who exactly is doing this forcing? In many cases, we're hearing about foundations forcing this issue on grantees. They're saying, tell us the race, gender, sexual orientation, you name it, of your board, your staff, your grantees, even your vendors. They're saying, give us this information as a condition of your grant. In other cases, it's the government forcing the issue. We saw this in California back in 2008 with AB 624. Many of you are familiar with that so-called greenlighting bill. That legislation would have required private foundations of a certain size to reveal race, gender, and sexual orientation data as it related to governance and grant making. Now, that was 12 years ago, but I think in today's climate, it is only a matter of time when demographic mandates once again threaten the charitable sector. We've seen a rash of states, and you can see the map on the screen here, attempt to impose similar mandates on publicly traded corporations. This year alone, 6 states, those are the states in dark gray, introduced legislation mirroring a California and Washington law requiring women on publicly traded corporate boards under the threat of a 6-figure fine. Hawaii has gone one step further. They're targeting nonprofit corporations, which would include most of us in the charitable sector. Connecticut legislators proposed a bill last year that would have required public and private employers in the state to have gender board quotas. California, where all bad ideas originate, it seems like, California has a bill under consideration right now that would impose racial quotas on publicly traded corporate boards. So I think the momentum that we're seeing on the corporate side will mean a big threat for philanthropy, and frankly, we're already seeing it happening. So the second big threat that I wanted to mention today is donor disclosure, and you can see this next map come up on the screen. Nationwide, we are really seeing a growing push to force nonprofits to disclose to the government names and addresses and other identifying information of people who have donated to their organizations. Really, activists, they want this private information, as Sandra mentioned, to target individuals they disagree with, to threaten them, to harass them, to intimidate them. This year alone, 15 states introduced or considered legislation that would require donor disclosure for 501c3 organizations. Those are the states in red on the map. And really, make no mistake, this kind of donor disclosure push would have very far-reaching consequences. A Missouri bill filed this year would have required all charitable organizations in the state to make their tax returns and their IRS filings incomplete public on a website. A New Hampshire bill from this year would have deemed any entity receiving more than $25,000 in state money a so-called public body subject to right to know laws. What most of these donor disclosure laws, I think, are trying to do is redefine certain terms like electioneering or independent expenditure. Remember, those are political terms, and they're doing this as a way to claw in 501c3 activities. And if you look at this around the country, this is a left-right issue with Republicans and Democrats on one side proposing donor disclosure laws in the states, and then on the other side, groups like the Chamber of Commerce or Planned Parenthood banding together to fight them. If any of the folks on the call today live in Alaska or Oregon, you'll be seeing a donor disclosure ballot measure impacting 501c3 organizations this November. And for everyone else, it's probably coming to your state.
Wow. Wow, so John walked us through where this started and how it started. Sandra was telling us about some of the key tactics. You just made it very concrete by showing us these maps and what is happening on the ground. Why? Why are these tactics being pursued, Christy?
Yeah, you know, I mentioned, and John and Sandra mentioned as well, that this philanthropy as public money argument means that there are no limits to the number of mandates that someone can try to impose on the charitable sector. And whether the topic is payout or the demographics of your board or a whole host of other issues, I think there is a through line that is worth noting. And Sandra alluded to this. First, the goal is to force the money or the information into the public square under the guise of transparency. And second, the goal is to use that information to change your grant making, whether through public pressure or even laws that mandate it. So you might be asking yourself, why does this matter? Well, we have seen calls mandating new or increased payout for private foundations and DAFs, asking for the demographic information of your board or your staff or your grantees, requiring non-familial board members for your family foundation, or as I just mentioned, mandating donor disclosure that violates the First Amendment. So now that I've thoroughly depressed you, Debbie, let's talk about what we should do about it.
Let's talk about what we should do about it. Yeah.
Yes, let's turn it positive.
Yeah.
We must and we will fight tirelessly to protect your philanthropic work and defend your freedom to invest in the causes you believe in. This is a call to action that we at the Roundtable are taking seriously, and we're taking it to heart. And one way we're doing that is by advancing philanthropic freedom in states across the country. You can see this next map up on the screen. This year alone, a record 7 states introduced donor privacy protections. More states introduced donor privacy legislation this year than in the past 2 years combined. Also this year, a record 4 states, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Utah, and West Virginia, those are the states in green on the map, they've enacted new donor privacy protections on the books. This year, more states enacted donor privacy legislation than in the history of the issue. Those 4 states I just mentioned join Arizona and Mississippi, which are also colored in green, for a record 6 states with donor privacy protections in place. We're also seeing many states advance philanthropic freedom protections, prohibiting certain requirements imposed on foundations and charities. You might remember that the Roundtable previously led an effort to cement this legislation in Florida, Texas, and Tennessee. Those are the states in gold. This year, I'm pleased to report that Utah now joins that list with new legislation shielding nearly 8,000 nonprofits in the state, giving over $12 billion to charitable causes. So we are definitely on the move, and we are working hard and aggressively to protect philanthropic freedom.
Thank you. Thank you, Christy. As I ask Christy to step aside and have Sarah come on board, I want to remind everyone that we have a Q&A button at the bottom, and we are going to turn to Q&A pretty soon. So I really encourage you to put your questions there, and then we will have a chance to ask all of our panelists about the things that you're thinking about. There's certainly a lot of interesting information here that probably affects a number of you in different ways, and we are here to answer your questions. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And Christy just talked about what are we doing about this? What is the Roundtable going to do about this? So I'd like to hear from you. What are some of the active campaigns that the Roundtable is engaged in right now?
Sure. So as you heard from Sandra and Christy, the tactics that they mentioned are being used at both the state and federal level to threaten philanthropic freedom. And as also mentioned, the Roundtable is one of the few philanthropy-serving organizations that is defending it. So one of the campaigns that we've been working on is in California to defeat legislation that works to expose donor-advised fund donors, the investments that those funds are invested in, and their grants. So you'll see a little picture of California on the screen. So just as a little bit of background, a freshman assemblywoman with the support of Cal nonprofits, so the statewide nonprofit association, along with Tom Steyer, who you may know from a brief primary presidential run, and his wife, Kat Taylor, all behind this bill to the most recent version of which allows the Attorney General to implement reporting requirements on donor-advised funds without any donor privacy protections. So in response to this, the Roundtable has submitted multiple letters requesting donor privacy be protected, and it's been made clear that exposing donors and their grant making is one of the many goals of this legislation. So the lack of those protections is unsurprising. But we are one of the only national organizations working to push back on this legislation and oppose it. With our allies in California, of course, letting them lead the way and us supporting them kind of from behind. The bill already passed the Assembly this year, but fortunately it's not expected to be considered by the Senate due to a backlog of bills and a shortened legislative timeframe amid the pandemic, which signals it's not a top priority of the Senate Judiciary Committee this year. They had to make a call for what bills they were going to consider, and this was not one of them. So that gives us a little bit of hope going forward. But it is still something that we are going to have to continue to push back on the state level, especially if other states take this up following California's efforts. Then on the federal level, we are also working with our national colleague organizations to oppose these calls for mandatory payouts on donor-advised funds and increased payouts on private foundations that Sandra mentioned in her comments. These calls are coming from a group known as the Patriotic Millionaires that you may have heard of. It includes people like Abigail Disney, Alan Davis, George Zimmer, others, along with other critics of the sector who think philanthropy needs to be doing more in the midst of the COVID health crisis and recovery. And while the Roundtable and Alliance for Charitable Reform supports organizations that voluntarily increase their grant making in the face of crises, we acknowledge that mandates diminish philanthropic freedom and put communities at risk in the future if there are no longer the resources to help with future crises. So, as Sandra briefly mentioned earlier, we've prompted our colleague organizations, what we call the National Infrastructure Organizations, the Council on Foundations, the United Philanthropy Forum, independent sector, to join with us in opposing these mandates. And we've actually sent a joint letter to Congress expressing opposition and educating them on the grant making that is being done voluntarily already in response to the multiple crises going on right now. And so while these calls for payouts aren't yet gaining momentum with lawmakers, which is good, we do believe we have to push back on principle. So we are also engaging on social media and our blog to emphasize the importance of philanthropic freedom. I think if we go to the next slide, you'll see some examples of the pushback that's being done, and that then the messaging that we are also using.
Sarah, very interesting. So that is what's happening now and all the steps that you're taking. And I'm sure a lot of the people who are on this webinar with us today have done many, many, many things from a grant making standpoint to support COVID efforts. So it's very important to hear what else it is that people are thinking out there. What else do you see coming on the horizon? Are there other threats we should be keeping in mind that we haven't talked about yet?
Yeah, that's a great question, especially in such a pivotal year with the election and this unprecedented health crisis. And so although the two campaigns I previously mentioned in response to your last question have been successfully sidelined for now, at least for this year, they're certainly not going to go away. So those are kind of top two on the list of threats. Out in California, we are all but certain that the Assemblywoman who has introduced this bill will introduce another bill next year targeting donor-advised funds and their donors, which could again threaten donor privacy. And depending on the success, other states could follow suit. We've already heard that others are watching California throughout this effort to see how the donor-advised fund legislation plays out. So this could turn into a state-by-state fight. Similarly, the Patriotic Millionaires and other critics of the sector are going to continue calling for increased and mandatory payouts until philanthropy is doing what they want, when they want, to whom they want. And we have already seen lawmakers questioning the potential effectiveness of increased payouts. And there's a possibility that some lawmakers could become interested in this type of policy and introducing legislation it's sometime in the next Congress to increase or mandate payouts on private foundations and donor-advised funds. There's also, sorry to just add to the list of horribles, well, there is also there's also a well-funded group that has formed recently of pragmatists who are mounting a PR and advocacy campaign looking for reforms at the margins. So that includes incentives for higher payouts instead of mandatory higher payouts, and mandating donor-advised fund payouts in general, because right now there is no mandatory payout for them. Could be redefining what is considered a qualified payout from a private foundation. Other ideas that are really designed to gain Congress's attention And so we have that to look forward to. And then finally, as Sandra alluded to in her opening comments, the election outcome at both the legislative and presidential levels could pose threats to philanthropic freedom. We'll know a little bit more about what those threats could be as we get closer to November 3rd. But past presidential candidates have called for limits on the charitable deduction. The kind of influx of progressive lawmakers that we're expecting based on results of primary elections going on could mean more prodding and mandating. So that's all something that we have on our radar for the coming year, and that we will be working through to defend philanthropic freedom.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a lot coming still. We've done a lot and there's a lot more to do. So thank you, Sarah, for walking us through
Never
that.
ends.
Never ends. All right, so I'm going to ask John and Christy and Sandra to rejoin us so that we can take some of your questions. And just before as we are all reconvening on Zoom here, there is a survey that we would love for you to fill out. Any feedback that you give us is extremely helpful to us for crafting more programming for you and figuring out what it is that we can do to support your philanthropic efforts. So I'm going to ask my colleague Tina if she could pop the link into the chat so that you can actually take a minute or two right now if you would like to fill that survey out for us. And at the same time, I would love to just thank Tina for all the help that she's given us in getting this webinar off the ground, and as well as our colleague Megan, who's in the background, who did the slideshow and who made those visuals possible for us. Thank you to both of you for making this work really smoothly. All right, so we've got our whole group back, and the first question is actually a question that I'd like to send Christy's way, and then if anyone has any comments they would like to add on to that, please do. Christy, why is the Roundtable, so this is picking up on something that you said, why is the Roundtable so concerned about these diversity and inclusion mandates and the diversion of dollars? What is it about that the Roundtable is so focused on?
Well, I think the Roundtable historically has always defended the right of any private organization to manage and staff itself. There will be some circumstances where foundations and charities say, yes, diversity practices absolutely help us achieve our mission. But what that doesn't mean is that diversity mandates for everyone are appropriate or even feasible for every philanthropic organization. A couple of things kind of swirling around in my head about that are some things to think about. One, if we are defining diversity only as differences of visual identity, we are really missing out on a much deeper and richer diversity. One that I think cuts to the heart of who we are, which is diversity of perspective and skills and life experiences and a whole host of other factors. Two, I think that we can all agree that different organizations need different strategies. And finally, I think it's clear that mandates from outside rarely understand the particular needs and trade-offs within a specific organization. I think while the mandates are well-intended, they can be counterproductive. In the charitable sector, I'll just end with this, there is a lot of competition for donations, for volunteers, for finding skilled staff willing to work for lower pay in the nonprofit sector. For many, there are going to be challenges in meeting certain demographic targets if you're in a remote area. I think the bottom line is that mandates and requirements from outside an organization make all of these things for the charitable sector so much more difficult. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did, Christy. Does anyone have anything they'd like to add to Christy's answer on that question? Okay. All right, so our next question is a really interesting one. Shouldn't foundations be working to move as much of their funding out the door as possible? And the questioner is coming from a point of view that the main purpose is to support issues and communities outlined in their missions. It's at a foundation's discretion, but isn't isn't it reasonable to expect that they should be working to move as much of that money out as possible? John, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Debbie, and thanks, Roxanne, for the question. I think that focusing on moving as much money as possible out the door, foundations do move a lot of money out the door, but is the objective, is the goal to move the money out the door or to do good things with the money? And those are, I mean, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive by any stretch, but it's also, there's a lot of work and energy, as the people, the participants in this Zoom call know. It's easier said than done to move the money out. There's so that's one issue. A second, and by the way, there are foundations that their objective is to move as much money out the door and to have as much impact as possible, and they are in spend down mode. And that is it's legitimate, it's right, it can be a great way to proceed when that is the choice that's made. Related to the question would be if it's one thing to get the money out the door, but it's another thing to do it thoughtfully. And this is something that goes back, I mean, at the risk of being a history or philosophy geek, Socrates talked about this, how difficult it is. So that's, I think as people want to do it, as they agree to do it, but that's not the objective that everybody has. And there are donors who've set up their foundations in perpetuity for the good of society in perpetuity, and usually with broad-based missions, so that there is flexibility for the then existing board to decide what to do for the good of society.
Debbie, can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I just want to make a quick point that we have heard that same question from folks on Capitol Hill, and we've done a lot of questioning of our members, and we keep coming back to the response that, listen, had we done this, had we shoveled money out the door after 9/11 or after the 2008 recession, when this country was really in a world of hurt, we wouldn't be in the position right now to be able to respond, not just in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, but in 6 months, in 12 months, when a lot of money dries up. So the thought is, thankfully, every foundation has their own perspective on how and when to give, and that diversity should be celebrated because it will leave money in the kitty for the next time.
All right, thanks, Sandra. Christy or Sarah, did you want to add to this one? No? Okay. I just want to give a informal shout out to some of my former colleagues who are on the call today and thank them for their questions. Here's the next question, and I think Christy, maybe this one makes sense for you to start with. Do state mandates on foundation hiring violate Title VII of the Civil Rights Act?
That's a great question. We were just talking about this on our prep call for this webinar, so I'll say my piece and then turn it over to the real expert who is John Tyler. But we haven't seen state mandates on foundation hiring. What we have seen is gender quotas for corporate boards, like there is in California and Washington, and other states are proposing this kind of legislation. The California law is actually being challenged right now, both in the state superior court, as well as there's a federal case now in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It's called Milan v. Padilla. The Roundtable actually authored an amicus brief on it, which I think was attached, Debbie, to the invite for this webinar. Yeah, and the basis for that case is that gender quotas for corporations not only violate the right of shareholders, but it also violates the Equal Protection Clause, which I think personally is a very sound argument. And if we see these same mandates come into philanthropy, I think a similar case could be made.
John, definitely want to turn to you. Christy's right. We were talking about this just the other day. So would you like to add anything?
Well, I do think, I mean, there are inherent dangers in quotas and ratios that are that threaten to undermine the rule of law and the fabric of law that we have, not to mention the principles on which that fabric is based. And do state mandates violate Title VII? The mandates themselves may not, but when foundations do hiring and they are now then factoring in race and gender, saying, I will not hire you based on your race or gender or sexual orientation or sexual identity, given recent Supreme Court cases, I'm not going to hire you based on that, or I will hire you based on that, which then leaves other people out. State mandates that are contrary to Title VII could be a problem for employers down the road.
Okay, thank you. So our next question, how is the roundtable leveraging data, showing extensive ramp ups in giving to donor advised funds, and presumably also at private foundations prompted by COVID? How do we tell the story?
I'll jump in with that. And I think this is an important question to address, because that data is what helps us deliver our message to lawmakers on Capitol Hill, and what is helping right now protect donor advised funds from and private foundations who are also increasing their grant making amid COVID from increased government overreach. So what we are doing on Capitol Hill is, in addition to these joint efforts with our colleague organizations to message what donor advised funds are doing, we are also sharing this information on social media, on the Alliance for Charitable Reform website, and pointing lawmakers and their staff to this information so that they not only have our position of philanthropic freedom, but also have the data to back up that position. I think it makes it very clear that voluntary increases in charitable giving, whether it is from your donor advised funds individually or from private foundations, are there. They're happening. People are stepping up in this crisis, and that data is buttressing our argument.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else want to add? No? All right, good. This is a longer question, and I want to read it in its entirety so that I don't leave out what it is that the person is really looking for here. Isn't there a fundamental misunderstanding of DAFs and foundations being advanced by this panel? All right, so here's what the questioner is asking. These are not donors' money or your foundation, but instead are separate nonprofit entities that have been created to serve the public by funding public charities. Many of these tactics to threaten philanthropic freedom appear to be motivated by parties who want to make philanthropy more impactful, right? Which is a positive. Sorry, that was an editorial, which is a positive. How might grant makers who operate in an environment lacking the discipline of the competitive private sector better articulate or improve their impact so as to counter the emergence of these tactics? Who wants to start?
I'll jump in on the first part, which is the distinction between our money versus their money. And I think that we agree with the questioner that we are not claiming that once the dollars go into a foundation or into a donor advised fund, that it still is legally the donor's money. It's not. It is put aside, earmarked, as we say in Washington, for charity. The distinction we're trying to draw is it the government's money or is it private money? And who has the right, the obligation to steward that money? And our position is it is private money. It doesn't automatically convert into the government's money. And because it doesn't convert into the government's money, it is still best stewarded, legally stewarded by the private sector, by the foundation, by the donor advised fund sponsoring organization.
And Debbie, if I could piggyback on that, I like and appreciate Sandra's answer. and want to add an additional flavor, which is, it seems to me, we want to encourage people to give their money away to foundations, to charities, to donor advised funds that will help charities, and by helping charities and other activities of foundations. Foundations do a lot more than just give money, by the way. There are other things that foundations do as well with their resources, all in furtherance of charitable good and social good. If we see perceptions or realities that foundation assets are deemed public, what impact will that have on the willingness of future donors to contribute, to give their money away in furtherance of charitable good and social good? I think there's a real danger that we would see that not be as effective or happen as much. To jump down towards to the last question, I think that in many ways that question really is, in a lot of ways, the heart of what we need to do to, I don't want to say defend philanthropy, but to demonstrate the value of philanthropy, to society, to charities, to donors. I mean, and it is, the lack of discipline is both pro and con. There are advantages to that because there's flexibility, there's opportunities to innovate, there's opportunities to be patient and take more time. But all of those things require their own sense of discipline and their own sense of important rigor to be able to do those things. And by the way, those things benefit from critiques. And so some of what I call the social accountability that we are experiencing and also pushing back against, there's a push out there that says foundations aren't accountable. And folks never seem to, those folks making the argument, they rely on legal accountability, which does exist, to a degree, and they completely neglect the social accountability, that is out there that we are pushing back against in a lot of ways. But the best way to push back against that, the best way for there to be the accountability, is to have the impact, to have the effect, to perhaps be more public, to be more transparent, voluntarily open about what you're doing and how you're doing it. And that can sometimes be a very effective counter to the tactics. So oddly enough, some of what the mandate that the subsidy crowd is, or subsidy squad, as Sandra called them, one of their pushes is for mandatory transparency. The roundtable, I did another monograph for the roundtable on transparency. Transparency is okay when it is part of a strategic, not only okay, it can be credibly useful when it is part of a strategic approach to the philanthropy, as opposed to one size fits all, being imposed. So, that's part of the way I would answer the question is, consider ways to let people know what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it.
Thank you, John. And believe it or not, we are already out of time. It's 2 o'clock. I apologize that we couldn't answer every question that was in the Q&A, but we do have your questions. And so we will reach back out to those that we couldn't get to. I want to really thank our panelists, our roundtable experts, for having this conversation, for talking about some of these real threats that face the philanthropic sector. And for our audience, the roundtable, this is a key issue for the roundtable. We are here to protect your philanthropic freedom. We are here to advocate for you. We are here to defend it and promote it positively. So your right to give money as you see fit, and your right to do that without coercion. So that is big task for us. Thank you for your support in that battle, and we look forward to continuing that conversation with you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.